Good afternoon. Welcome to the 9th lecture in the series on Riemann integration. In the last few lectures, we proved a lot of hard results, which required some serious thinking and estimates. Today, what we are going to do is to prove the so-called fundamental theorems or calculus in the context of only Riemann integration. Okay, and the proofs will be much simpler, and more importantly, when we learn integral calculus in our high school, we learn integration as a reverse operation, as an operation reverse of differentiation. That was essentially Newton's approach to integration. As I said in the first lecture, integration is about 2500 years or more old. Okay, so in this, now we have developed a very rigorous theory for integration. Now how does it relate to what we know as integration from our high school days? Okay, fundamental theorem of calculus answers that. It justifies Newton's approach under certain conditions. Okay, so without much ado, let us get started with the result. We will do that. Yeah, so see, one basic result I should have said in the last thing, I forgot, that is very crucial. It is so-called basic estimate for integrals. Okay, what does it say? You see, you should know that differentiation is easy. From your high school days, you know, given a function somehow or other, you can always differentiate and get the derivative. But you can't say the same thing with respect to integration. If I give a function, can you integrate it always? As you know, it's a very, very tough problem. So in analysis, most often having a real value of, that is, evaluation of integral is a very, very difficult job. But remember, as I have been emphasizing in analysis is always try to approximate things which is of practical use. Okay, physical sciences or engineering sciences, you don't need e or pi or square root 2, etc. You need a very good approximation to these things so that things work fine. Okay, so even for the same thing with integral, right, I may not be able to evaluate, but whether I can give some kind of a good approximation. That's where our theory developed so far does it. But apart from that, we also want to know about the estimate for the integrals. So let us do that. So let us say it's an r of alpha, where alpha is an increasing function on the interval ab. Okay, then let's look at a to b f d alpha. Now this is a real number, therefore I can talk about its modulus, right? Remember, if you understand, integration is something like a continuous summation, right? Therefore, if I have some kind of summation a k and I want an integral, I want to estimate this, what is the obvious thing? Assume it's a finite for the time being, this is less than or equal to mod a k, right? So if you understand this, what should be the estimate you should have here? I'm sure all of you would have said it, a to b mod of d alpha. This is the estimate I should expect. But before I say this, there is something which is technically which I have to make sure. See, this right side should make sense, right? But we know that if f is an r alpha, mod f is also an r alpha, and hence a to b, integral a to b mod f or d alpha makes sense. That's also a real number. Okay, and again by monotonicity result, we know that it is non-negative. Okay, remember this left side is non-negative, this should also be non-negative if I want to write less than or equal to. Do you understand this? See, whenever you have some kind of theorem statement like this, try to understand first that. Don't jump into the proof. Try to understand, okay, whether these things make sense, okay, etc. Right. So this is what we want to prove, right? The proof is again some very easy, okay. All right. So you know that if a is a real number, right, or if you say x, okay, then we know plus or minus x is less than or equal to mod x, right? Therefore, if f is a real valued function, plus or minus f of x, this is a real number, this will be less than or equal to mod f x. Therefore, minus f as a function will be less than or equal to mod f, and plus f will be less than or equal to mod f. You understand? That's all I want to use. Therefore, since a to b f d alpha, right, since f is less than or equal to mod f, I know this is less than or equal to integral a to b mod f of d alpha. Okay, this is all right. And similarly, minus f is less than or equal to f, therefore I know a to b minus f d alpha, this is a function now, is less than or equal to integral a to b mod of d alpha. This is due to the monotonicity of the integral. Yeah, okay. But linearity of the integral says this fellow is nothing other than minus a to b integral f d alpha, right? Therefore, what do you think I have shown? Plus or minus integral f d alpha is less than or equal to a to b mod f d alpha, right? But modulus of the integral a to b f d alpha is one of these numbers, either plus of this integral or minus of this integral. Therefore, I have shown that what is d alpha. Do you understand the proof? Okay, pause, review, proceed. So I don't need this theorem for fundamental theorem of calculus, but for the later purpose I need it in today's lecture itself. So and it's also actually belong to some of the properties of class of integral functions. So due to time limitation I didn't complete that in the last lecture. Anyway, now fundamental theorem of calculus. Let us go back. So what did Newton's way of integral mean? He said integral of f dash is f. Okay, you understand that? So in particular, if it is a kind of a to b of f dash, you wanted to say it is fp minus fp, right? You understand? This is what Newton's method. That is, if I want to integrate a function g a to b, try to see whether g is of the form f dash, then integral a to bg is fb minus fa. This is what the definite integral approach of our calculus it is. You understand? Now I want to justify this because we have developed integration theory. Now this is the formula I want to prove. But let's understand properly. What are the things I need then? A to b f dash must make sense. So see, these are all Riemann integrals. That is alpha x equal to x, the identity function. Okay, it's a pure Riemann integral, not Riemann Stieltjes. That is why you don't see d alpha here. It's only dx if you want. Okay, right? So the left side should make sense. That means f dash must be integrable on the interval ab. Okay, okay, that's the only condition. So this is the first fundamental theorem. Theorem of calculus. What does it say? Let f be a function from a to b to r. Assume that f dash belong to r of ab. What does it mean? It's a Riemann integrable where alpha is the identity function. The integrator is identity function. Then integral a to b f dash is fb minus fa. That's it. Okay. So we have rigorously established Newton's approach. Okay, we have to prove this now. Okay. Now what is that I want to prove? Integral a to b f dash equal to fb minus fa. Right? So I have to compute the integral of f dash. Now which definition do you think I will be using? Remember, I already said something about whether I should use Riemann sum approach or Darboux sum approach. If I have a very definite idea what the integral is going to be, then it's very likely Riemann sum approach will be easier, right? It's like if I know xn converges to x, then I should try to estimate mod xn minus x. If I only want to prove xn is convergent but I don't care about the limit, then I will try to show xn is Cauchy. Then I have to estimate mod xn minus xm. Do you understand? Keep on reviewing like this so that your analysis becomes much stronger. Okay, so okay, now we had understood I want a Riemann approach. Very good. Okay, so what does the Riemann approach say? Call this as a capital A or something, this integral, right? So what does it say? That is you start with any partition P, or rather there is a given epsilon positive, there is a partition P, so that for every partition Q which is finer than P, and for every set of tags, let us look at the Riemann sum SFPT. This minus A should be less than epsilon for every Q. Sorry, you understand this? For any set of tags in Q. You understand that? Yeah. Okay. Now, how do I go to use that? Let us write down. Okay. What does SF equal to looks like? This one looks like something like f dash of ti. Sorry, this is f dash of ti into xi minus 1. I am deliberately avoiding delta xi. This is how this looks like. I equal to 1 to n. What are ti? These are ti. Ti's are elements in xi minus 1 to xi. Look at this expression. Does this remind you of something? See, xi minus 1 xi, these are the endpoints of this interval. Ti is a point in between. Then you are writing f dash t into xi minus 1. What does it remind you of? Some kind of mean value theorem. You understand that? Yes? It reminds us of mean value theorem, right? So that is approach I want to do. Okay, so what do I want to prove? I want to prove fb minus fa minus a is arbitrarily small. This is what I want to prove. For every epsilon positive, I want to prove this happens. If I prove that, then we are through. You understand that? Okay, but what I know is yes, f dash qt minus a is less than epsilon, right? Now, and yes, f dash qt is something to do with like mean value theorem. So do you see something? We had already done 2 or 3, maybe about more than 3 examples in which telescopic sum played a key role, right? Like monotone function, etc. Do you remember that? And also delta b minus delta a, sorry, alpha b minus alpha a. How did you do that? Yeah, summation alpha xi minus alpha xi minus 1, right? All these things suggest what should I do? Start with any partition Q which is finer than P, and right, let us look at, then I have the ith subinterval xi, right? Now what is this? F of xi minus f of xi minus 1, I equal to 1 to n. What is this? This is a cyclic sum, sorry, telescopic sum. So this is actually fb minus fa. Is that clear? Yeah, this is fx1 minus fx0, which is f of a. Next one will be fx2 minus fx1, and so on. So this is a cyclic sum, right? Now look at this. The fa minus fb is this, but fxi minus fxi minus 1, I know what it is. So what do you think I will do? You told me f is differentiable, right? F is differentiable and f dash belong to f dash is Riemann integrable, right? Therefore, by mean value theorem, this object is nothing as an I equal to 1 to n f dash of ti into xi minus 1. This is by mean value theorem. Yes, therefore that is equal to fb minus fa. But what is this? This is nothing as an the Riemann sum of f dash with respect to the partition q and with respect to the tags t, where t1, t2, tn are the tags. You understand this? Yeah. All right. But what I know, if q is finer than p, then I know yes f dash q t minus a is less than epsilon. But on the other hand, I found that this is nothing other than fb minus fa. See, this is true for any partition q and any set of tags t. But what I did is I took a partition q which is finer than p and applied mean value theorem. I got something. So in particular for this Riemann sum, okay, this should be true. What should be true? Modulus of the Riemann sum minus a must be less than epsilon. But for this particular Riemann sum is nothing other than fb minus fa. Therefore I have proved mod of fb minus fa minus capital A is less than epsilon, and epsilon being arbitrary, I proved the result. Do you understand this? Pause, review, proceed. Okay, right. Now there is also another theorem known as second fundamental theorem of calculus. What does it say? It says the following. Suppose f is a continuous function from a b to r, right? Then we have seen earlier, okay, for any x between a and b, okay, on the interval ax, the function f is integrable. That means integral a to x fx dx, if you want. This makes sense, okay, exists. This is a real number. Therefore I define a new function g whose value at x is gx, that is integral a to b, integral a to x fx dx. Okay, therefore g is a function from a b to r. Do you understand this? Okay, right. So are you following? Okay. So we are assuming at present this is integrable. Okay, there are two versions. Let us start with the simplest version. You let f be from a b to r be integrable, then define gx equal to a to x fx dx. We know that it exists for every x in a b. Therefore g is a function from a b to r. What I want to claim is g is Lipschitz continuous. So what does that mean? That is for every xy in AB, okay, I want to say there is a constant L, so that for every x by AB, modulus fx, modulus gx minus gy must be less than or equal to L times mod x minus y. Therefore L has to be naturally greater than or equal to 0. Then I say G is Lipschitz or Lipschitz continuous on the interval AB. Do you follow this? If you had seen my lectures on continuity, you would already have heard the word Lipschitz. Okay, so let us do that. So what is that I have to do? I have to estimate gx minus gy. Okay, but okay, now without loss of generality, let me assume x is less than y, therefore y is greater than x. Okay, so I have to estimate gy minus gx. Okay, modulus gx minus gy is same as modulus gy minus gx. So let me try to estimate. Now what is gy? It is a to y ft dt, and this is a to x ft dt. Right, now I have a, I have x, I have y. You understand this? This may be. So what have we seen earlier? We had already known that the integral of f over a to t, a to y is sum of two integrals, integral a of f from a to x and from x to y. Therefore I can write this a to x ft dt plus x to y ft dt minus a to x ft dt. You follow that? Yeah. So remember, these are all real numbers, therefore they get cancelled. Therefore I am left with x2y f of t dt. Therefore gy minus gx equal to this. But what am I supposed to do? I am supposed to estimate g of y minus g of x. That is, I have to find the modulus of, estimate modulus x minus y f of t dt. Now tell me what you are going to do. Yes, this is what we started with, right? Today's lecture. This is going to be less than or equal to x2y mod f of t dt. Yeah, right. Now remember, what was our assumption? F is integral on A to B. Then in particular it has to be bounded, right? Suppose this, that means let us assume mod f is bounded by m. Therefore this fellow will be, so let us assume mod f is less than or equal to m. Therefore this fellow will be less than or equal to x to y m dt. But m is a constant that we know how to integrate. This is m into y minus x. Yeah, we had already done that. Have you understood? Therefore I have proved gy minus gx is less than or equal to m into mod y minus x. Because y is greater than x, it's the same as y minus x. Have you understood? So what do you think I have proved? I have proved something very interesting. See, this is the way you have to learn. This is very interesting. Please try to understand this carefully. If I have an integrable function, okay, you know that it need not be continuous, right? But when I integrate, okay, the resulting function, the new function g, becomes much better. It is well behaved. It's not only continuous, not only uniformly continuous, it is actually Lipschitz continuous, very strong. Do you understand that? So that is why integration is like a smoothing process. It makes it better. Like, you know, you have a crumpled cloth and then you apply a hot iron properly, what happens? It becomes straightened, nice, better. So same thing. So integration process, okay, it makes the function, you take a function, okay, you feed it to the integration operation, then the resulting function will look better. Okay, it's like a refinement process, right? A human being goes into a good educational institution where value education is given. The outcome is well educated, well mannered citizen of the country. So integration does that. It's a good school, right? Right. Please pause, review, understand. Pause, review, and then proceed. Okay, this actually, this I should not call this as fundamental theorem of calculus, just this is a result. Okay, second fundamental theorem of calculus comes now. So second fundamental theorem of calculus. So let again a to b to r, okay, be integrable. Right, let C be a point in AB. Assume f is continuous at C. Then the indefinite interval gx, earlier what did we see? If the indefinite interval becomes Lipschitz continuous, right? Now you already start with some kind of continuity. Let's assume that f is continuous on all of AB. Then when I feed to the integrator, it should come much better function, much better behaved function. So what do you think it should be? Can you make a guess? Yes, it should be differentiable. Yes, gx, namely a to x ft dt is differentiable at C. Okay, once it is differentiable at C, then I may want to know what is g dash and what is g dash C. Remember, what was our aim today? Integration is a reverse of differentiation, right? Therefore I integrated, then I differentiate. What should I get? I should get the function itself, fc. In particular, do you understand? Please take some time to understand the statement. Do not be in a hurry to Look at a proof. Yeah. So when I fed in an integral function, the output is much better. It's a Lipschitz continuous function. So when I feed in a continuous function, what I'm going to get is a differentiable function. Do you like it? Very good. So how do I prove it? The proof is again easy. So let us fix a C. Let A, this may be C. Let us assume for the time being x is positive. X is not positive, meaning greater than 0. Right? I want to say g dash c exists. How do I define g dash c? G dash c is gx minus gc by x minus c as limit x tends to c, and x may be on both sides of c if c is an interior point. If it's at A, only from the right side. If it is at B, if c is B, it is only from the left side. Okay, such things are okay. Don't worry to get worked up about so many things. Okay, for the time being, I am assuming c is an interior, and I am approaching c from the left side. Sorry, from the right side. X greater than c. Right? Okay. So, but what is gx? Gx is a to x f of t dt. And what is gc? It is a to c f of t dt. Therefore, what is gx minus gc? As we saw in the last Lipschitz thing, this is nothing other than c to x f of t dt. Do you understand this? This is gx minus gc. Right? Okay. But what do I want to prove? Gx, therefore, gx minus gc by x minus c is nothing other than 1 by x minus c integral c to x f of t dt. This is what we have proved. Do you understand this? Yes. Now what am I supposed to show? I want to show as x goes to c plus, okay, this limit is f of c. That means, what does it mean? That means give me an epsilon positive, there is a delta positive, so that for all x in c to c open, c to delta, what should I have? Gx minus gc by x minus c minus f of c must be less than epsilon. This is what I am supposed to prove. Yes? Okay. This is where we are going to do a very important trick. Okay, learn this trick very well. It will be very useful to you later. Okay, what is the trick? The trick is this fellow, this is same as integral c to x f of t dt. This is an integral, indefinite integral, whereas this is just f of c. Do you understand this? The idea is this f of c also I want to replace by an integral. And when I want to compare both the integral, that is, I want to use linearity of the integral. Therefore, the domain should also be the same, integration, right? Limits of integration should also be the same. So, I want to write it as something like c to x f of c, right? But then notice that this is 1 by x minus c here. Okay, f of c is a constant. Therefore, this will be f of c into x minus c. But I want only f of c. Therefore, if I divide by x minus c, then I will get f of c. Do you understand that? So, the upshot, what I am saying is the following. This is an important trick. I request all of you should learn it well. C to x f of t minus 1 by x minus c, c to x f of c. That's it. If you want to put a dt, I have no issues. But by linearity of the integral, this is going to be 1 by x minus c, okay, into c to x f of t minus f of c, the whole thing into dt in the modulus. Okay, this is by the linearity of the integral. Now remember, x I am taking greater than c, therefore 1 upon x minus c is positive, therefore I can take 1 upon x minus c, right? And therefore modulus comes here. But modulus of integral, we already know that's a basic estimate, that is c to x modulus of f of t minus f of c dt. Now I think all of you get a eureka moment. What do you think I should use? I want to say this is less than epsilon. So what should I use now? Yes. Since f is supposed to be continuous at C, given the epsilon as above, there is a delta positive, so that mod t, okay, mod x minus t, sorry, x minus c is less than delta implies mod fx minus fc is less than epsilon. Therefore, let us take a c. Let us take c plus delta. To start with any x which is less than c plus delta. Therefore, t will be between c and x. You understand that? Therefore, distance between t and c will also be less than delta. Therefore, modulus ft minus fc will be less than 1 by x minus c, c2x epsilon dt. Yeah, but epsilon is a constant. What do I get? 1 by x minus c into epsilon into x minus c, therefore equal to epsilon. Do you understand this? So for x approaching c from the right I have done. For x approaching from c from the left also you can do the similar thing, right? So that in that case fx minus x will be again c to x, but then the convention c, remember now c is greater than x, interval c to x will be minus of interval x to c. Yeah, and here 1 upon x minus c modulus, when I take it will be 1 by c minus x. Therefore that minus and this minus will cancel, everything will be alright. Okay, it should be a trivial exercise, you should do it. So what do you think I have proved? I have proved that if f is integrable and f is continuous at c, then indefinite interval is differentiable at c, and the derivative g dash is at c is f of c. So in particular, if f is a to b is completely continuous, right, then what do I get? The indefinite interval g is from a to b is, from ab to r is differentiable, and g dash is f on ab. Okay, p r p. Yeah, okay. Now as I said, it is a very important thing. So the intuitive way of understanding integration is it improves the smoothness property. One usually calls it smoothness. Integrability becomes continuous, continuous becomes differentiable. If it is already differentiable, it will become another differentiable. So what do I mean by that? Suppose, let me start with an f, okay, which is continuous, then call f1 the function g, indefinite integral, okay, is f1, then f1 is differentiable and f1 dash is f. Now f1 is differentiable, therefore it's also continuous, therefore take the indefinite integral of f1. You understand that? The corresponding g, right? Then call it f2, right? Then f2 will be differentiable. What is the derivative? f2 dash must be f1, right? You understand this? Yeah, therefore I can differentiate this once more, that is second derivative of f2 dash, that is going to be first derivative f1 dash, which is f. So what is the thing I have done? I started with a continuous function, taking indefinite interval once, I got a differential function. If I take indefinite interval of this indefinite interval, then I get a function which is twice differentiable, and it's a second derivative if I take, that will be the original function, and so on. Do you understand this? As a kind of amusing exercise, let's look at f of x, okay, equal to mod x on the interval -1 to +1. This is continuous. You also know it's not differentiable at origin, right? But then let us look at f1, the indefinite integral. You can compute, that is going to be continuously differentiable. Why continuously differentiable? Because the derivative is f and f is continuous, therefore it is continuously differentiable. Then take f2, it will be twice continuously differentiable, and so on. Yeah, this is the amusing part of the fundamental theorem. Okay, before I stop the lecture, I would like to emphasize the trick. Okay, that trick is very useful trick. Okay, what does it say is the following. The trick is, yeah, suppose f from a b to r continuous, right? Then what should be known as the mean value or average value? F on the interval a b, right? Suppose f is a finite 1 to n to r is a function. What is the average value of f? I will say f1 plus f2 plus fn by n. Then I call this the average value of f. Alright, if you learn some kind of probability statistics, you will immediately understand. Alright, now again intuitively, integration is a continuous sum, whatever it may mean. It's just intuition. Okay, continuous sum. Therefore, what should be the average and what should be n? N is the number of elements here, but on the interval a b, the number of elements is infinite. So how do I define? So now you look at the yes, so it should be, you will immediately say it should be f of t dt. This is like summing f1 plus f2 plus fn, but I have to divide it by the number of elements n. Here a b has number of elements will be infinite, so what should I divide by? Should divide it by the length of the interval. Then this is called the average value or mean value. Yeah, okay. So the theorem which I want to talk about is the so-called mean value theorem for integrals. So let f from a b to r be continuous, then there exists c in between a b, so that f of c is the average value of f, that is 1 by b minus a to b ft dt. This is the theorem. Again, try to understand this geometrically. Suppose f is a positive function, right, from the interval a b. Okay, now the area I counted. Okay, look at the area. This is the area of this, and then divide by the length. What does it want to say? It says that there is some point c, right, that is b minus a into f of c equal to a to b f of t dt for a positive, or this is true for anything. In particular, I am looking at a positive, and this is the area of this, okay, this region, right? And what does this say? Look at, suppose this is my c, this is my c. Let us look at f of c and look at this rectangle f of c. This is c f of c. Okay, the height is f of c, and look at it, the base multiply, you got it. Do you understand the geometry of the mean value theorem? Okay, now the proof is extremely simple. Since f is continuous on the closed and bounded interval, let m be the minimum of f on ab, and capital M is not any bound, but it is the minimum and maximum of the function on the interval ab, right? Therefore, what do I know? I know that for all x in AB, m is less than or equal to fx, thus less than or equal to capital M, right? Very good. Now let's look at this. Since m is less than or equal to fx is less than or equal to n, by monotonicity, remember now I am not assuming f to be non-negative. F is any function. Okay, f is any continuous function. I am back to the general case. Therefore, I can, by monotonicity integral a to b m dt should be less than or equal to integral a to b fx dx. That should be less than or equal to a to b m dt. But what is this? This is little m into b minus a. Okay, less than or equal to this integral, less than or equal to capital N into b minus a. So what do I get? I get that m is less than or equal to 1 by b minus a. Now remember, b minus a is positive, therefore 1 by b minus a is positive. Therefore I can multiply this inequality by a positive quantity. The inequalities remain the same way. Right? This implies this. Is that clear? Now look at it. What does it really say? What is f? M, little m is the minimum. It is attained. There is a next one says f of x1 is m. And what is capital M? It is maximum. It is attained. That means there is an x2 so that f of x2 is m. You understand? Therefore this is your something like f of x1, this is like f of x2. So this is some alpha or lambda. This is a number which lies between two things. Values attained. Therefore what do I know? F is continuous. Therefore by intermediate value theorem I know there exists a c in the interval ab, so that f of c must be equal to lambda. In fact c lies between x1 and x2. I do not know whether x1 is less than x2 or x2 is less than x1. You understand? Because the picture may look like this. This may be my x1, this, okay, this may be my x2. You understand that? So are you following? Or the other way around? Okay, this is actually x2, right? Yeah, x2 and x1. Yeah, this is my x2, this is my x1. Yeah, so any c lies between x1 and x2 so that f of c is lambda. In particular, c lies in the interval ab, because x1 x2 lies in the interval ab, c also lies in the interval ab. Therefore what do you think I have proved? This lambda, namely this object, is f of c for some c in between a and b. So we have proved that result. Yeah, so before I end, I will state one more result. Let us again assume f from ab to r is continuous. Right, now let's assume c is in the interior. Okay, therefore I have c minus h and c plus h, or r. Let me write c minus r, c plus r positive. Okay, let's assume a less than c less than b. So r is such that c minus r to c plus r is contained in the interval ab. Therefore this interval makes sense. C minus r to c plus r f of t dt makes sense. You follow this? Yeah? Okay. And we already know if f is continuous, therefore it's also continuous on this interval if you want, closed interval if you want, right? Therefore this interval exists. Now let us look at 1 by 2r. What is the length of this interval? 2r. So this is the average of this, right? This is related to mean value theorem, that's why I am saying. I want to say this converges to fc. Right? If f is continuous, the mean value of the function converges. So what kind of a thing? I am taking intervals which are symmetric around c. Okay, the proof is so easy, so you may not understand the subtlety of the game. The subtlety of the game is I am not talking about any interval around c. I am taking only intervals symmetric around c. That's a very crucial thing. You follow that? Okay, now how do I get it? Okay, again the same trick. So that means I have to estimate 1 by 2r c minus r to c plus r f of t minus f of c. This is what I want to estimate. Right, this is an integral. So what do you think? Now I think all of you are good, so you would know what I have to do. This is equal to 1 by 2r c minus r to c plus r f of t minus integral c minus r to c plus r f of c dt if you want. This is a constant, therefore it will be f of c into the length of the interval 2r, but that 2r cancels with this. Okay, this is the modulus I want to estimate. Now I can use the linearity of the interval. Linearity of the interval says it is c minus r to c plus r f of t minus f of c, okay, into dt. right, and modulus. But the basic estimate says this is less than or equal to 1 by 2r into c minus r to c plus r modulus f of t minus f of c dt. Now I think all of you can complete the proof, right? Since f is continuous at c, okay, right, there exists f given epsilon positive, there is a delta positive, so that mod t minus c is less than delta should imply ft minus fc in modulus will be less than epsilon. Therefore, if I choose my r so that r is less than delta positive, right, therefore what will I have? This is c minus r, c plus r, this is c plus delta, c minus delta. Therefore my t, distance between t and c will be less than r, which is less than delta. You understand that? Therefore this will be less than epsilon. But then constant, this will give me 2r times epsilon and multiply 2r, so equal to epsilon. So we have proved this. Then what do I prove? If I take the average on symmetric intervals around c, okay, they converge to f of c if f is continuous at c. Yeah, this is what we have shown. So in the next lecture, from the second fundamental theorem of calculus, I will deduce a weaker version of the first fundamental theorem of calculus. Okay, there I am going to see here I assumed f is differentiable, f dash is integrable, that's it. Whereas when I want to deduce this theorem from the second fundamental theorem of calculus, I will assume f is continuously differentiable. That means f dash is continuous on the interval ab. Naturally it will be Riemann interval. So that hypothesis is stronger there. So the theorem is weaker because stronger hypothesis but the same conclusion. You understand? So it's a slightly weaker version of first fundamental theorem of calculus, but it's also good because when you go to higher dimensions and even infinite dimensional spaces, this weaker version will be more easy, much easier to establish, and most often that's all you need. We will do it, and we will also do integration by parts. And remember, in integral calculus, what is the single most important trick in the computation of integrals? It is integration by substitution. So that also we will justify. So these three results I will prove in the next lecture. Okay, till then, take care, stay safe, we'll meet again. Okay, and after that lecture there are two important examples which are very, very specific to Riemann-Stieltjes integral. Okay, if you want to say you learn Riemann-Stieltjes integral without learning these two examples, if you simply say I learned the theory, it's not good. Okay, so we will prove those two results. So in all probability I may need another 2 to 3 lectures maximum to complete this course, this series of lectures on Riemann integration. I hope all of you enjoyed. Okay, we will meet again.